All right, hello everybody. Hello everybody. This is the Unit 6 review video as promised to you. So let's dive right in. Okay, so we're going to start. We have three theorists that we really need to know, or economic theories, I should say. And one of them has two subset groups. So it's really four that you really need to understand. So first is the classical theory. This was pre-Great Depression. And the classical theory is this economic logic of, hey, when aggregate demand shifts left, when people buy less, prices fall. But at the same time, there's downward pressure on wages, and that downward pressure is equal to the downward pressure on prices. So when prices fall, businesses aren't going to lay people off and reduce production. Instead, wages are going to fall. The price of all the resources for buying those goods are going to fall. It's going to happen really quickly, in fact, immediately, according to classical theory, right? And this makes some sense to them because using the economic model they knew where aggregate supply was completely vertical, that's what is illustrated here, right? The logic is when aggregate demand shifts left, the price that you pay for your groceries goes down, but also the price that the business pays to buy those groceries so they can resell them to you goes down, right? So their profits are remaining intact if they're moving in the same direction. Profit isn't changing. It's not like costs stay the same and prices I can sell them for are lower. Well, now I'm losing profit. I reduce production. According to classicalists, they're going down at the same rate, right? So GDP is going to stay exactly the same at full employment, no matter what happens to aggregate demand. So as a result, the curve is completely vertical. What do you do when something bad happens? You do nothing, according to the classicalists, right? Because the economy, if it's not working, if we're in a recession, it's going to be super temporary, and it's just because there's a miscommunication or a little bit of lag time there, but it should fix itself very, very quickly. All right, so showing you that just in a nutshell here. Grab my little marker here. Aggregate demand shifting left. Woo, that was a runaway train. Notice that GDP doesn't change. We went QF, QF. Even with the dramatic shift in aggregate demand, GDP didn't change, but our price level did. We went from a price way up here to a price way down here, call it price 2. So there's downward pressure on prices. GDP remains the same. That's a classicalist model. So you should do nothing. The economy will fix itself very, very quickly, according to them. And then the Great Depression happened, and a guy named John Maynard Keynes came around. We call his ideas the Keynesian Theory. It's this idea that when aggregate demand shifted left, prices didn't change. They didn't go down. In fact, prices didn't change at all. Prices were sticky. So not only did prices not fall, but GDP fell dramatically, and tons of people were laid off. So Keynes says we have to account for this in our economic theories. So the way that he accounted for it was revising the model to have a horizontal aggregate supply curve at low quantities, right? So when we have this leftward shift in aggregate demand as shown here, you can see that the price stayed the same. Price didn't change at all because there's sticky prices. So the price that people are paying doesn't change, and the price that businesses are paying to buy the goods and services doesn't change, but the amount of that people are purchasing decreases dramatically. So I reduce production, I lay people off, and GDP falls dramatically, right? So the logic behind it, prices are sticky. So when aggregate demand shifts left, GDP falls significantly. And there's no hope. Like there's no lowering of resource prices that are going to happen because businesses are worried about lowering prices, right? If I have to pay my workers the same amount, why would I lower prices and reduce even more profits? So businesses are leery of doing that. So as a result, there's no hope that resource prices are going to go down and eventually self-correct, at least not for a while. In the long run, it'll happen. But according to Keynes, in the long run, we're all dead, right? So as a result, we have and this is key, a persistent recession. When aggregate demand shifts left, it will not self-correct because we're kind of locked into this battle of prices, right? So it's not going to change unless the government steps forward and makes it happen. So if the government comes in, they're going to try to shift aggregate demand back to the right, right? So they're going to get my marker here, they're going to take aggregate demand, shift it back to the right. And in doing so, try to get us back to full employment GDP. But notice, if I go from this point to this point, there's no increase in price level that normally happens with aggregate demand shifting right. In other words, we have zero inflation occurs in this scenario, right? Nothing. It's going to be just fine. So that's the Keynesian theory. Prices are sticky. So when aggregate demand shifts left, people stop buying stuff. It is felt dramatically by the businesses. GDP falls, and then the government has to intervene to fix it. The complete opposite of the classical theory. All right, so it looks like this. These are the three ranges of aggregate supply. You have your Keynesian range here, where we have a horizontal supply curve. You've got your classical range where aggregate supply is vertical, and then this little upward sloping here is the intermediate range, and it's the compromise range. It's where we end up looking for in the short run when we're making our economic policies. Okay, so those are two major categories. We'll get into the subcategory next. So classicalism has been largely disproved, so in steps the Neo-Classicalists. There are two of these. There's monetarists and the rational expectation theorists, or the RETs. The monetarists believe that when a recession happens, eventually aggregate supply is going to shift back to the right, self-correcting our economy. Like we've shown in class in the last unit, the self-correction of the economy. Leave it alone, supply takes it home. They believe in that. And they believe it works every single time, as long as we don't do anything to mess it up, right? So why doesn't the self-correction happen? Why did the Great Depression happen? They say it's because we've mixed up the signals with monetary policy, right? We have monetary policy issues. Sorry, somebody came to the door. I had to pause it. All right, so the reason it doesn't self-correct is because of the Federal Reserve. They're the villains to the monetarists, because the Federal Reserve controls the supply of money. So in a recession, the Federal Reserve oftentimes increases the supply of money because they have complete control over it. They shift it out, and it pushes down the value of money. So the interest rate falls. So now banks can lend out money for a much lower interest rate. And according to the monetarists, this creates a bubble in our economy, right? People who shouldn't be borrowing are borrowing to buy houses, for example. And so the housing market looks really good for a moment. It's a bubble rising, like, ooh, look how beautiful. But eventually those people are not going to be able to pay their loan anymore. The bubble bursts and the economy falls as a result of that, right? Or the federal or the banks are giving out more loans to businesses who should be failing, but they keep on taking out these loans that they have no business getting. And so that industry looks like it's doing really, really well, and then they all have to pay their bills, and boom, the bubble bursts and it falls. Right? So they're saying this boom and bust of our economy, these major recessions, is caused by discretionary monetary policy or caused by changes in the supply of money to try and fix our economy. So they use a very important mechanism or equation to explain that, called the equation of exchange. This is the equation of exchange right here. We have money supply times velocity equals price times quantity. So you will have to figure this out. It's actually pretty easy. Let's say the supply of money is 100. Let's say the velocity of money, so that's times, is 4. Velocity of money is 4. Well, what's that mean? Well, it means every dollar in our economy is going to be spent 4 times within that year. So normally when the economy is doing well, the velocity is quicker. When the economy is doing poorly, the velocity is slower, because some people who get that new dollar are worried about the economy, and so they save it instead of spending it, which slows down its velocity, if that makes some sense. So that's 4. So price times quantity, we have another term for that. Price times quantity is actually nominal GDP, right, together. And so 100 times 4 equals 400. Now what they're saying is that the Federal Reserve is coming in here, let me get a different color, and they increase the money supply, say, to 300 to try and fix our economy. And velocity stayed the same, so our nominal GDP is now 1,200. And they're saying you're creating fool's gold. It looks like our economy is doing really, really well, but what you're actually doing is you're not changing the quantity, you're changing the price. You're causing inflation, right? So instead, there should be a monetary rule. A monetary rule means that the Federal Reserve cannot willy-nilly change this money supply, because it creates bubbles. It creates this kind of fool's gold of changing nominal GDP, but not real GDP. So instead, the monetary rule says that the change in supply should be the same percentage as the expected percent change in real GDP, or expected percent change in growth. So if there's a 2% expected change of growth, then the Federal Reserve should increase the money supply by 2%. If there's a 10% expected growth rate, then the money supply should change by 10%. You're saying only change the supply of money by the amount that is necessary for people to buy the goods and services that are being produced, right? Attach it to the actual change in quantity, not to some sort of discretionary policy. If you do that, you will get the government out of the way. When you do, the economy will once again self-correct. That's the monetarist approach. Next up are the rational expectation theorists. And I'll make this really quick because they're kind of a rogue group. But basically, they believe the economy will self-correct very, very, very quickly. And the reason it will self-correct very quickly is because people and businesses are super rational. And we have all kinds of data sources. So we can predict that a recession is going to happen. And we'll do everything in our power as individuals and as businesses to negate or get rid of those negative consequences. So businesses will lower wages, for example. Individuals will save money so that they can maintain their spending habits in case something happens. And so because of these kind of presumptive actions, right, preventative actions that people are making, our economy actually doesn't go into a recession. It'll go from A to B to C very, very quickly. The problem is the government's getting involved. The government's messed up those signals. So people are less likely to put money aside when a recession is coming because they think the government will just bail them out. And businesses are less likely to be responsible with their financing because they know the government thinks they're too big to fail and will make sure that they stick around. So that's the main problem there is government regulation. So what do you do in the midst of a recession? You deregulate. Get the government out of there, let people see the signals clearly, and let it self-correct. The critique of these neo-classicalists is simple. Velocity keeps changing over time. Prices historically have still been sticky regardless of this. And in every single scenario, even in the Reagan era where the monetarists were king, average supply still took a long time to self-correct. Right? So those three main things have kept the Keynesian model as the mainstream economist. All right, let's keep rolling. The Phillips curve. You will have to draw this curve. Very, very important. The Phillips curve. It's an inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. We show that by a downward sloping short-run Phillips curve. Right? We also know that our long-run Phillips curve is going to be vertical. Right? We call this LRPC. And then right here at the intersection, that's going to be our current inflation rate. So I don't know, like 4%. But it's also going to be our natural rate, NRU, of unemployment, natural rate of unemployment, right? Because in a long enough timeline, we will end up at full employment GDP again, like we always do. And so we'll end up at this intersection once more, right? You need to be able to show a recession. Know that a recession is to the lower right of your curve, right? And you can follow your arrows. What happened to inflation? Well, it went down. What happened to unemployment? It went up. And those arrows will lead you back to your correct answer. Right? You need to be able to show an inflationary gap. Inflation is at the top of the slide. And follow your arrows. What happened to inflation? Well, it went up. Right? What happened to unemployment rate? It went down. So as a result of that action, we end up back on the curve at the top of the curve. Right? And then full employment, of course, is at the equilibrium where we're at natural rate of unemployment. So you do have to be able to show all of those things. You also have to be able to show cost push inflation. What is cost push inflation? Let me get a new color up here. Cost push inflation is average supply shifting left. So let's say I'm right here at this point with 1% and 9% unemployment. All right. Cost push means my prices went up. Inflation happened. It also means that unemployment went up. Right. Two bad things. So as a result, I have a random point out here. How did I get there? I got there by shifting the short run Phillips curve to the right. So follow your arrows, follow the logic, and you'll be in good shape. And remember, if aggregate supply is shifting left, then short-run Phillips curve is shifting right. If aggregate demand is shifting left, then we're moving right along the curve. Okay? Keep those things in mind. You do need to be able to show self-correction. Right? So self-correction, real quick, looks like this. We have our long-run Phillips curve right there. Self-correction simply says when we fall into a recession, let's say we're right here, aggregate supply will eventually shift right, fixing our economy. Leave it alone, supply takes it home. When that happens, aggregate supply does that, then our unemployment is going to fall and our inflation rate is going to fall. So we're going to end up on a point over here, right? On the actual natural rate of unemployment, self-correction. So how do we show this? We show this by a leftward shift in our short-run Phillips curve, getting right back there, okay? The final thing you'll need to be able to do is show these side by side, the ADAS model right beside the inflation model. Be able to show a recession or inflationary gap on that model, and then show where that's going to end up on the Phillips curve. Okay, so very important to be able to draw this. I give you a couple of examples of this on the Rev Review. Check it out. Outside of just drawing a bunch like we've done in class, there's not much else I can offer here except practice. Practice it. Say, okay, I'm going to show a recession. All right, I'm going to show self-correction. Show it on the ADAS model first because you know that, and then use that information to help you understand what you should do on the short run Phillips curve. All right, final thing is the misery index. The misery index, super easy. This shows us how miserable nations are, and it's simply inflation plus unemployment. So if my inflation rate is 4%, my unemployment rate is 6%, then my misery index is 10%. Okay, and that's it. That's the entire exam. You will have to know how to graph these things. You'll be doing a side-by-side graph, and then know your theorists well, and you should be in pretty good shape. All right, that's all I have for you guys. Hopefully this is a helpful video. If you want more graphing on the Phillips curves, check out the Khan Academy videos. They're very good. Rewatch your AC/DC Econ videos, or try out the thing that I gave you guys in class, the stats. That'll give you a lot of, I think, helpful information on how these shifts happen and how these changes are shown on the Phillips curve. All right, that's it.